At my husband's wake, my heart was shattered. But I was truly shocked when I heard Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, whisper to my son, Thomas, put her in a nursing home and sell the house before she comes to her senses. Before grief could swallow me whole, I called my lawyer and checked the will. Edward had foreseen everything. Vanessa would get nothing, and I knew I had to fight to keep this house. I'm so glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can know how far this story has traveled. That day, the air in the funeral home was heavy, as if sorrow had turned into a mist, clinging to every breath I took. I, Clara, 72 years old, stood in the middle of a room adorned with pristine white lilies, trying to keep myself from collapsing at Edward's wake, the man who'd walked beside me for 48 years of life. The scent of lilies was stifling, but it couldn't mask the coldness of loss. The cream-colored walls, the soft golden light from the chandelier, and the murmurs of those offering condolences only made my heart break more. I wore a simple black dress clinging to a body that had grown thin from sleepless nights. In my hand, I clutched the handkerchief Edward gave me for our 40th wedding anniversary. The soft silk embroidered with our initials C and E intertwined was now soaked with tears. I looked toward the oak coffin where Edward lay, his face peaceful as if asleep. But that silence, no more warm laughter, no more sparkling eyes made me feel like I too was fading away. Edward was once a math teacher beloved by the whole town. He had a way of turning dry numbers into stories that captivated his students. To me, he was my partner, my soulmate, the man who made my coffee every morning and held me during stormy nights. 48 years together, walks under the oak trees, arguments and reconciliations, nights sitting on the porch, watching the stars, now just memories. I stood there among the crowd, feeling like a lost boat adrift at sea, with no anchor left. The guests offering condolences formed a long line. Mrs. Brown, our longtime neighbor, held my hand, her eyes red and teary. Edward was a wonderful man, Clara. He'll always live in our hearts. I nodded, giving a faint smile, but each word of comfort felt like a knife, reminding me that he was gone forever. A former student of Edward's, now an engineer, shared how he had inspired him. I listened, but my mind drifted to those evenings when Edward sat at the kitchen table solving math problems with a childlike smile. My legs began to tremble after nearly 2 hours of standing to greet guests. My head spun as if grief had drained every ounce of my strength. I couldn't keep pretending to be strong anymore. I needed a place to breathe, to cry where no one could see. I turned to my son Thomas, standing right beside me, his warm hand gripping mine as if afraid I'd fall. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his deep voice full of worry, his tired eyes betraying sleepless nights. Thomas, 45, was Edward's and my pride and joy. He had his father's salt and pepper hair, but those gentle brown eyes were inherited from me. Today he wore a black suit, standing tall, trying to be my rock. But I noticed the tension in him, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if carrying an invisible burden. "I just need to rest for a bit," I whispered, forcing a smile to reassure him before walking away. He nodded but said nothing more, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for someone. I knew who he was looking for: Vanessa, his wife. Vanessa stood a few steps away, striking in an elegant black dress that hugged her figure. Her blonde hair was pinned up perfectly, and the smile on her lips looked rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. She bowed her head when someone offered condolences, her hands clasped tightly. But something about her made me uneasy. Vanessa's green eyes never lingered on anyone. Too long, they darted through the crowd as if taking inventory, calculating. I tried to love her for Thomas's sake, but in their 10 years of marriage, Vanessa always kept a cold distance, like a wall I could never cross. I remember the first time I met Vanessa at a family dinner. She smiled brightly, talking about her work as a real estate agent, but her eyes scanned our house with a greed she could barely hide. Edward once joked, "That girl looks at our home like she's appraising it." Back then, I laughed, thinking he was being too sensitive. But now, standing in the funeral home, I couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa was waiting for something, perhaps the opportunity Edward's death had brought. I walked past the rows of chairs, past the white lilies, toward a small room in the corner of the funeral home. This room, with its green velvet armchairs and a large flower arrangement, was where families often sought privacy. Today it was empty, just me and my grief. I sank into a chair, clutching the handkerchief embroidered with C and E. Tears rolled down my cheeks, unstoppable. "Why did you leave me, Edward?" I whispered, my voice choking. His image came to me so clearly, that childlike smile as he solved a math problem, his warm hand holding mine through tough days. 48 years weren't enough. A million years wouldn't be enough. I quickly wiped my tears, not wanting anyone to see me so frail if someone walked in. But then I realized I was hidden behind a large flower arrangement, nearly as tall as a person, full of lilies and white chrysanthemums, shielding me completely. I was about to speak to make my presence known, but Vanessa's icy voice cut through the air, freezing me in place. "I told you, Thomas," she said, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "We should have discussed this before your father passed." Thomas's voice answered, weary and hesitant. "Not now, Vanessa. My father hasn't even been laid to rest." I stopped breathing, my heart pounding. They didn't know I was here, just a few meters away, hidden behind the flowers. I wanted to stand to leave, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. Something in Vanessa's tone, a cruelty I'd never heard so clearly, kept me from moving. "Not now," she mocked, the soft click of her high heels tapping on the wooden floor. "Thomas, you know where we stand. Your father's gone and your mother isn't young anymore. We have to act fast before things get complicated." "What complications?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling as if afraid of the answer. Vanessa paused, and I heard the rustle of her dress like she was turning to face him. Then she spoke, her voice low but clear, like a curse. "Sell the house before she comes to her senses. She's too old to manage it anymore." My heart seemed to stop. She was that me. The house where Edward and I raised Thomas, where we carved our names into the oak tree in the garden, where I still hear his laughter every time I step onto the porch, was to Vanessa just something to sell. I gripped the handkerchief tightly, my nails digging into my palms, trying not to sob out loud. Her words were like a blade slicing through every memory of the family I thought I could trust. Thomas protested, but his voice was weak, as if he knew he couldn't win. "Mom won't want to leave the house, Vanessa. It's her whole life." Her life. Vanessa scoffed, the cold sound echoing in the small room. "She's 72, Thomas. What's left for her? The house is too big, the stairs are dangerous, and she's getting forgetful. Do you want her to fall and have us stuck with hospital bills? Putting her in a nursing home is the sensible thing to do." I was so shocked I couldn't think straight. A nursing home, I still cook my own meals, tend my garden, drive to the supermarket. Sure, I misplace my keys or phone sometimes, but who doesn't? Vanessa was painting a picture I didn't recognize, a useless old woman, a burden to be cast aside. I wanted to scream, to storm out and confront her, but the pain and betrayal held me back like a rope, binding me tight. Vanessa went on, her voice dripping with greed. "That house is worth at least $500,000. We sell it, pay off our debts, buy a new apartment, invest in Lily's future. This is our chance, Thomas." I sat still, barely daring to breathe, feeling like my whole world was crumbling. Edward had been gone less than a week, and yet she was already carving up my life. Thomas. My son, the boy I once held through childhood nightmares, responded with a hesitant voice. "But Mom could live with us, couldn't she? We have enough room." I heard the sincerity in his tone, but it was feeble, as if crushed under Vanessa's force. live with us." Vanessa scoffed, her laugh sharp and cold like shattering glass. "Thomas, are you serious? She'd meddle in everything, how we raise Lily, how I organize the house. I don't want her there disrupting our lives. A nursing home is the best place for her with professional caregivers. It's what's best for all of us." I gripped the handkerchief embroidered with C and E, my nails digging into my palms until they stung. A nursing home I still cook. Elaborate dinners tend the garden Edward loved, and remember every moment in that house, where we celebrated Thomas's first birthday, where Edward and I danced under the moonlight on the porch. Vanessa didn't just want to take my home. She wanted to erase me from my son's life as if I were some old, useless thing to be discarded. "Vanessa, she's my mother." Thomas said, his voice trembling, but I could sense his helplessness. "We can't just push her away like that." "You're my husband," Vanessa cut in, her voice hard as steel. "And this is our future. That house could change our lives, Thomas. Don't let emotions get in the way." I heard the soft tap of her high heels as if she was pacing. Then her voice dropped, almost a whisper. "We'll meet the lawyer on Monday. Look into the will and make sure everything goes smoothly if needed." Then came the sound of the door closing, soft but echoing like a verdict. I sat frozen, not daring to move, as if any sound might make the world collapse entirely. My tears stopped falling, replaced by a smoldering, burning anger. The house wasn't just bricks and wood, it was the heart of me and Edward, the place where we built a family, the legacy he left behind. Vanessa wanted to steal it, and Thomas, though unwilling, was being led by her. Then I remembered. Just days before Edward passed in a hospital room, heavy with the smell of antiseptic. He held my hand, his eyes dim, but his voice firm. "Clara, I've made sure you'll be all right. The will is taken care of." At the time, I thought he was just comforting me, but now those words felt like a small flame flickering in the darkness. What did Edward know? What had he seen in Vanessa that I overlooked? I stood up, my legs still shaky, wiping my tears with the handkerchief. In the mirror on the wall, I saw a pale face, eyes red from crying, but also a new spark of determination. I couldn't let Vanessa win. I returned to the wake, weaving through the crowd, trying to keep a calm exterior. But when my eyes met Vanessa's, her fake smile now felt like a knife. Thomas looked down, avoiding my gaze, as if carrying a heavy secret. I knew in that moment that I had to find out about Edward's will. He'd left me a weapon, and I would use it to protect the house and myself. The night after the wake, I sat alone in the home Edward and I had built over 40 years. Moonlight slipped through the living room window, glowing on the polished wooden floor, where Thomas's laughter once echoed as a child. The 2-story house with red brick walls and large windows overlooking the garden was now eerily silent, as if it too mourned Edward. I sat in his favorite armchair, clutching the notebook he left behind my fingers, tracing his handwritten notes about math lessons. Each page seemed to carry his breath, but the silence gripped my heart. Vanessa's words at the wake, "Sell the house before she comes to her senses," still echoed in my mind like a cruel song I couldn't shake. I looked around from the bookshelf Edward built himself to the painting I made in art class, from the fireplace where we warmed ourselves on winter nights to the oak tree in the garden where he carved Clara and Edward one summer afternoon. This wasn't just a house, it was our heart, the legacy of our love and years of sacrifice. Yet Vanessa saw it as a commodity, a chance to profit. I closed my eyes and memories of Vanessa flooded back sharp like broken glass. When she married Thomas 10 years ago, I tried to welcome her. She stepped into our home with a radiant smile, talking about her real estate work, but her eyes scanned every corner like she was appraising it. Edward said to me after that dinner, "That girl looks at our house like she wants to sell it on the spot." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his eyes were serious, as if he saw something I didn't. Over time, Vanessa slowly revealed her true nature. She began isolating Thomas from us. Family dinners became rare because of her busy schedule. When I called to invite them for Christmas, she often declined, saying old-fashioned gatherings weren't their thing. Once at a dinner 3 years ago, she looked around the dining room and said, half joking, half serious, "This house is a gold mine. If we sold it now, we could buy a beachfront villa." Thomas gave an awkward laugh, but Edward didn't smile. He squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes sharp as if he could already see the future. When Edward fell ill with heart trouble 2 years ago, Vanessa showed up even less. She sent curt messages, wishing him a speedy recovery, but rarely visited. While Thomas and I took turns at his bedside, Vanessa came once, standing in the corner of the room, glancing at her watch like she was counting the minutes. I thought she was just busy, but now I understand she didn't care. To her, Edward was merely an obstacle, and I, a 72-year-old woman, was the final hurdle on her path to this house. I opened Edward's notebook, flipping to the last page, where he'd written a simple math equation with the note, "For Clara, always my answer." Tears fell not just from the pain of losing him, but from Vanessa's betrayal. I'd spent my life as an elementary school teacher, teaching children to read and write, raising Thomas with all my love, and now I was seen as a burden. Thomas, the boy who used to run to hug me after school, now stood on a dividing line manipulated by Vanessa. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the oak tree under the moonlight. I remembered Edward saying, "Clara, this house is ours forever." But now I wondered, was I really as weak as Vanessa thought? Could I fight when I was all alone? Helplessness flooded me, but somewhere deep inside, a small flame began to burn a vague determination, whispering that I had to protect this house, not just for me, but for Edward, for everything we'd built. The morning after the wake, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, falling on the wooden table, where Edward and I used to drink coffee every day. I made a cup of tea, but it tasted bland, as if grief had stolen even the smallest joys. The house remained silent, with only the sound of birds chirping in the garden, where the oak tree bearing our names stood tall. I tried to do chores, wiping the table, watering plants, but Vanessa's words from the wake clung to me like a dark shadow. Sell the house before she comes to her senses. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I opened the door, and there stood Vanessa holding a plate of apple waffles, her smile as bright but as false as an oil painting. "Clara, I brought some pastries for you," she said, stepping inside without an invitation, as if this were already her house. Her gray business dress hugged her figure, and her high heels clacked on the wooden floor. I thanked her, but a wariness rose in me like a cat spotting a snake. "Sit down, Vanessa," I said, pointing to a kitchen chair, trying to keep my voice steady. She set the pastries down, then to my surprise, opened a kitchen cabinet, grabbed a plate, and remarked, "Your house is so cluttered, Mom. Let me help tidy up. I've managed this kitchen just fine for 40 years. I replied, my voice firmer than I intended. That cabinet with the dishes Edward and I picked out together wasn't hers to touch. Vanessa turned her smile, flickering briefly, but she quickly regained her confidence. "Of course, Mom," she said, sitting down, crossing her legs. "I'm just worried about you. All alone now, this house must be hard to manage." She pulled a stack of papers from her bag, placing them on the table with a slow, deliberate motion like playing an ace card. I brought some info on high-end nursing homes, private apartments, prepared meals, activities for seniors. You should take a look. I glanced at the papers showing smiling elderly people playing chess, as if life were an endless vacation. But I knew this wasn't care. It was the first step to pushing me out of my home. "I'm not ready to leave Vanessa," I said, sliding the papers aside. "No one's forcing you to go right away," she replied, but her eyes said otherwise. "It's just good to plan. The real estate market is hot right now, and this house, it's too big for one person." She looked around, her gaze lingering on the window to the garden, as if already picturing a for sale sign out there. I took a sip of tea, trying to stay calm. "I spoke to Dr. Harper last week," I said evenly. "He says I'm perfectly healthy, capable of living on my own." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting resistance. "Sure, but accidents happen, Mom. The stairs, the garden, they're dangerous." She stood as if wrapping up the conversation. "I have a meeting to get to. Keep the papers, give them a read." After she left, I sat staring at the plate of waffles, feeling as if I'd been violated. I couldn't let Vanessa dictate my life. I picked up the phone and called Helen, my dear friend, a former social worker with sharp eyes and a warm heart. "Clara, are you okay?" she asked the moment she heard my trembling voice. I told her everything, Vanessa's words at the wake, her visit today, the nursing home brochures. Helen was quiet for a moment, then said, "Vanessa's playing mind games, Clara. You need to check the will now. If Edward saw a lawyer before he passed, he might have prepared something. And don't let her back you into a corner. You're stronger than she thinks." Helen's words were like a ray of light in the darkness. That evening, I cleared Edward's desk where the scent of wood and ink still lingered. In a drawer under a stack of papers, I found a small note in Edward's familiar handwriting. "Call Mr. Larson if Vanessa tries anything." My heart raced. Edward had known. He'd foreseen her schemes. I clutched the note, feeling as if he were standing beside me, whispering, "Don't be afraid, Clara." I knew I had to act, meet Mr. Larson, check the will, and protect this house, not just for me, but for our love. After finding Edward's note with the words, "Call Mr. Larson if Vanessa tries anything," a new strength rose within me. This house with its red brick walls, the oak tree engraved with our names, and memories of Edward wasn't just a home, it was my fortress. Vanessa wanted to steal it, but I wouldn't let her win so easily. I decided to confront her directly, no more hiding. It was time to show Vanessa I wasn't the useless old woman she thought I was. I called Thomas, my voice calm but firm. "I want you and Vanessa to come to the house Saturday evening. We need to talk about the future." Thomas hesitated, asking if something was urgent, but I only said, "Be on time and I'll explain." Then I reached out to Helen, my dear friend, who'd urged me to check the will. "Clara, are you sure?" she asked, her voice concerned but supportive. "Absolutely," I replied. "I need you here as a witness." Finally, I texted Lily, my 17-year-old granddaughter, Thomas's daughter. "Grandma needs you Saturday evening," I wrote. "I'll be there, Gran," she replied instantly with a heart emoji. Their support was like a breeze lifting my sails. Saturday evening, I prepared everything carefully, like a warrior ready for battle. I set out a tray of cookies and a pot of coffee on the dining room table, where Edward and I used to host family dinners. The soft golden light illuminated the painting I'd made a corner of the garden with the oak tree, like a reminder of why I was fighting. I wore a green sweater, Edward's favorite color, and stood before the mirror, smoothing my silver hair. My face still bore traces of grief, but my eyes now sparkled with determination. "I can do this, Edward," I whispered, feeling as if he were smiling from somewhere. When the doorbell rang, my heart pounded, but I took a deep breath and opened the door. Thomas stepped in his black suit, rumpled his eyes, weary as if carrying an invisible burden. "Mom," he said, giving me a light hug, but I could feel the tension in his embrace. Vanessa followed, her gray business dress, hugging her figure, her smile as fake as ever. "Clara, your house is still as cozy as always," she said, but her eyes scanned the room as if appraising every item. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the sofa where Edward used to read his newspaper. Helen was already there, seated in an armchair, her sharp eyes watching Vanessa closely. I poured coffee, trying to keep my hand steady, then sat down across from them. The air was heavy, like the calm before a storm. "What did you want to talk about?" Mom, Thomas asked, his voice low, his eyes avoiding mine. I took a deep breath, my voice steady but firm. "I want to talk about this house, and what I heard at the wake. I looked straight at Vanessa, seeing her smile falter for a moment. I was in the small room behind the flower arrangement when you told Thomas, sell the house before she comes to her senses. Don't tell me I misheard Vanessa. Silence engulfed the room as if the air had been sucked out. Thomas paled, turning to Vanessa, his eyes full of shock. Is that true? Mom. Vanessa stiffened her hands, clasped tightly on her dress, but she quickly regained her composure. Clara, you must have misunderstood, she said, her voice sweet but trembling slightly. I was only worried about you. This house is too big, not safe for you to live in alone. Misunderstood, I cut in, my voice sharper than I expected. I heard every word, Vanessa. You said I was too old, talked about a nursing home, about selling the house to invest in the future. I didn't imagine this. I looked at Thomas, seeing him bow his head as if wishing he could disappear. Vanessa gave an awkward laugh, her eyes glinting with anger. Clara, you're exaggerating. I only want what's best for the family. You can't stay here forever with the stairs and the dangerous garden. I held her gaze unflinching. I'm healthy, Vanessa. Dr. Harper confirmed it. And this is my home where Edward and I built our lives. You don't get to decide for me. Thomas shifted as if wanting to speak but stayed silent. Helen gave a subtle nod, signaling I was doing the right thing. I knew the battle wasn't over, but for the first time I felt in control. Vanessa hadn't expected me to confront her head-on, and the surprise in her eyes was my first small victory. The air in the dining room was heavy, as if every word I spoke had drained the oxygen. I sat up straight, my eyes locked on Vanessa, who had just tried to deny her cruel words from the wake. I'm not exaggerating, Vanessa. I repeated, my voice sharp. I heard you talk about selling the house, about a nursing home, as if I were a burden to be discarded. Thomas, my son, bowed his head, his hands clenched on the sofa as if wanting to escape the truth. Helen, seated in the armchair, watched with sharp eyes, ready to step in if needed. Vanessa shifted, her fake smile gone, replaced by a frown. Clara, you're blowing this out of proportion, she said, her voice trembling slightly but still clinging to confidence. I only want what's best for you. This house isn't safe, steep stairs, a big garden. If you fall, who'll take care of you? Thomas and I are just thinking of your health. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, cutting through the tense silence. I stood, my heart racing, knowing it was Lily, my granddaughter. When I opened the door, Lily stepped in, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her black hair tied high, her eyes blazing with determination. Gran, I'm here, she said, hugging me tightly, then turning to Vanessa. What's Mom saying about your house? Vanessa frowned, her voice cold. Lily, this is adult business. You don't need to get involved. I'm not a kid. Lily shot back, stepping to stand beside me, her eyes resolute. And I heard you last week on the phone talking about selling Gran's house to buy a new apartment. You think I don't understand? You said, as long as she agrees to the nursing home, it'll all be done. Thomas looked up, his face pale. Is that true, Vanessa? He asked, his voice trembling as if seeing his wife's true nature for the first time. Vanessa opened her mouth but couldn't find words, her hands shaking slightly on her gray dress. Lily, you misunderstood, she finally said, but her voice was weak, unconvincing. I didn't misunderstand, Lily cut in, her voice sharp. You wanted to sell Gran's house right after Grandpa died. I saw you checking house prices on your computer, texting someone about this prime property. I placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, feeling her strength like a flame warming my heart. Helen spoke up, her voice calm but authoritative. Clara doesn't need to leave her home. I've contacted a social worker. They can assess the house and suggest modifications, handrails for the stairs, a medical alert system. Clara can stay here safely for years to come. I pulled an envelope from my bag and handed it to Thomas. This is a letter from Dr. Harper, I said. He confirms I'm healthy with no cognitive or physical issues. I don't need a nursing home, and I'm not leaving this house." Thomas opened the envelope, scanning it quickly, his eyes widening as if the truth had just hit him. Vanessa shot to her feet, her face flushed red. "This is a trap," she shrieked, her voice shrill. "You're all trying to make me the villain." I only wanted what's best for the family, but clearly no one here respects me. "No one's making you the villain," I said, my voice calm, but hard as steel. "You did that yourself when you plotted to sell my house behind my back right on the day I lost my husband. I won't let you decide my life. We should wait until the will is read to settle everything." Thomas looked at me, then at Vanessa, his eyes full of conflict. "Mom's right," he finally said, his voice low. "We need to wait for the will." Vanessa gave a cold huff, grabbing Thomas's arm and pulling hard. "Let's go, Thomas. Clearly we're not welcome here." But Thomas didn't stand right away. He looked at me, his eyes full of regret, as if wanting to say something but unable to find the words. Finally, he stood and followed Vanessa to the door, his steps heavy as if carrying a new burden. When the door closed, Lily hugged me, whispering, "Don't worry, Gran, I won't let Mom do anything to you." Helen smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did great, Clara. Now prepare for the will. I bet Edward left a big surprise." I nodded, feeling as if I'd just climbed a mountain. Sitting back on the sofa, I looked at the painting of the oak tree on the wall, sensing Edward's presence. He'd given me the strength to confront them, and I knew he'd keep guiding me. Vanessa could be angry, but I was no longer the trembling woman in the funeral home's small room. I was Clara, and I would fight to the end. A week after the tense confrontation at the house, I walked into Mr. Larson's office, the family lawyer, with my heart pounding like a drum. The office was just as it was 10 years ago when Edward and I updated our will, glossy brown leather chairs, landscape paintings on the walls, and the faint scent of wood from the old desk. But today, the air felt heavy, as if every corner of the room knew the fate of the house, and my life was about to be decided. I wore my green sweater, Edward's favorite color, clutching my purse, trying to appear calm despite the storm of emotions inside. Thomas and Vanessa were already seated facing me across the long table. Thomas looked exhausted, his eyes avoiding mine, his hands flipping through a magazine without really reading. Vanessa, in contrast, sat upright, her black business dress hugging her figure, a confident smile, as if she were already certain of victory. Her gaze swept over me, icy, as if to remind me she still held the upper hand. But I was no longer the trembling Clara in the funeral home's small room. I was Clara, guided by Edward's love, and I believed he had left me a shield. Mr. Larson, in a gray suit with silver hair, entered carrying a thick folder of documents. "First, let me offer my condolences, Clara," he said, his voice warm and deep. "Edward was a wonderful man, and I know today isn't easy for anyone. Thank you." I whispered, my voice catching at Edward's name. I glanced at Vanessa, seeing her nod politely, but her eyes were glued to the folder like a hungry wolf eyeing its prey. "To business," Mr. Larson said, opening the folder. "Edward's will is very clear. Clara, as the surviving spouse, will inherit the house at 24 Maple Street, along with all its furnishings, the joint savings account worth $200,000, and a life insurance policy of $300,000. I heard a sharp exhale from Vanessa, but she quickly masked it with a strained smile. "What about the investments?" she asked, her voice sweet, but dripping with greed. "I'm getting to that," Mr. Larson replied, his tone calm. "Edward had a retirement account worth approximately $500,000. Clara is the primary beneficiary with full discretion over the funds." Thomas nodded, unsurprised, but his eyes remained lost, as if caught between loyalty to me and pressure from Vanessa. I gripped my purse tightly, feeling a surge of electricity run through me. This wasn't the whole story. Edward had promised he'd taken care of everything. Mr. Larson adjusted his glasses, his voice growing more serious. However, there's a special provision Edward added 3 months before his passing regarding the house. Vanessa froze, her smile vanishing. I felt my heart beat faster as if Edward were here holding my hand. Mr. Larson read slowly. The house at 24 Maple Street is bequeathed to Clara with a life estate. Upon Clara's passing, or if she voluntarily sells the house, ownership will transfer to Thomas. However, if Clara is coerced to leave the house against her will, or without the recommendation of 2 independent doctors that she requires specialized care, the house will be sold and all proceeds will be donated to the Animal Protection Organization per Edward's wishes. The room fell silent as if time had stopped. Vanessa turned pale, her hands gripping the chair, her mouth open but speechless. Thomas looked at Mr. Larson, then at me, his eyes full of shock. Dad thought we'd force Mom out of the house. Mr. Larson remained calm. This is Edward's legal wish. He recorded the signing of the will, confirming he was fully lucid. We also have a cognitive evaluation to prevent any disputes. Vanessa finally erupted, her voice shrill. What is this, some kind of joke donating to animals? That house is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I sat still, but inside I wanted to shout with joy. Edward, my loving husband, had foreseen Vanessa's schemes. The room in Mr. Larson's office remained silent after the special provision of the will was announced. Vanessa sat rigid, her face flushed, her eyes blazing with anger, but unable to speak. Thomas looked at me, his eyes full of shock and remorse, as if realizing his mistake in letting Vanessa manipulate him. I sat upright, clutching my purse, feeling as if Edward were here smiling at me through the words of the will. He had built a fortress around the house around me that Vanessa couldn't breach. Mr. Larson cleared his throat, breaking the silence. One more thing, he said, pulling 2 cream-colored envelopes from the folder, Edward's familiar handwriting on them. Edward left 2 private letters, one for Clara and one for Thomas. He requested I deliver them after the will was read. He handed me my envelope, my name Clara, my love written in blue ink, the letters slightly shaky from his final days. I touched it, feeling as if I were touching Edward's hand. Thomas took his letter, his eyes wavering as if afraid of what was inside. Vanessa stared at the envelopes, her lips pressed tight, clearly furious at being left out. What about me? She asked, her voice shrill. Mr. Larson shook his head. I'm sorry, Vanessa, but Edward left nothing for you beyond what's stated in the will. Vanessa shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly on the wooden floor. This is an insult! She screamed, her eyes blazing at me as if to burn me down. I'm his daughter-in-law. I've been in this family for 10 years, and I get nothing. Just money for animals and letters for her. She pointed at me, her hand trembling. Vanessa, that's enough. Thomas said, his voice low but firm, the first time I'd seen him stand up to his wife. Sit down or leave. Vanessa stared at Thomas, shocked, then spun around her high heels, clicking sharply as she stormed out of the room, leaving a cold gust in her wake. The door slammed shut, and I felt a quiet victory. Vanessa had lost not just because of the will, but because she never understood the love and loyalty Edward had for me. Mr. Larson nodded at me as if he knew what I was thinking. Clara, would you like to read the letter now? He asked. No, I replied, my voice catching. I want to read it alone. Thomas nodded, clutching his letter, his eyes full of regret as he looked at me. Mom. I'm sorry, he whispered, but I gave a small smile. I knew he needed time, and I trusted Edward's letter would guide him. Back home, I sat in Edward's armchair, moonlight spilling through the window, illuminating the painting of the oak tree on the wall. I opened the envelope, took a deep breath, and read his words. Clara, my love, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I want you to know you were the light of my life. I saw how Vanessa looked at our house, how she distanced herself from you and Thomas. I feared she'd try to take what we built, so I arranged the will to protect you. The house is yours, Clara, forever. Don't let anyone make you doubt your strength. You raised our son, taught hundreds of students, and loved me through every hardship. You're stronger than you know. Live well, love yourself, and keep this house as you kept my heart. Forever yours, Edward. My tears fell, but this time not from grief, but from gratitude. The letter was like Edward's arms wrapping around me, reminding me I was never alone. I looked out at the oak tree in the garden where our names intertwined, and it felt as if he were standing there, smiling. I folded the letter, pressing it to my chest, feeling my heartbeat stronger than ever. Vanessa may have left, but I knew she hadn't given up. But I wasn't afraid. Edward had given me the house, but more than that, he'd given me myself. Clara, 72 years old, strong and ready to face the future, whatever it brought. In the days following the will, reading The House at 24 Maple Street seemed to come alive again even without Edward here. Sunlight streamed through the living room window, illuminating the painting of the oak tree on the wall, where my name and Edward's intertwined. I sat in his armchair holding the letter he left, feeling as if he were still protecting me. Vanessa had lost not just because of the will, but because she never understood the strength of the love Edward and I had built. But this victory wasn't just about keeping the house. It was the start of healing my family. Vanessa, in her fury after the will reading, posted a long rant on social media, slandering me as a selfish old woman blocking the family's future. But she didn't expect that Thomas, my son, had seen the messages she sent to a real estate agent right after the wake. "Sell the house as soon as possible," she wrote, followed by a $ sign emoji. Thomas, shocked by his wife's deceit, confronted her. A week later, he called me. His voice choked, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I let Vanessa go too far." He said he was filing for divorce, unable to live with someone who cared only about money. I opened the door for Thomas one evening, seeing him standing there, eyes red, like the little boy who used to run to me after a bad day. "I don't blame you," I said, pulling him into my arms. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee at the wooden table where Edward used to tell jokes, and for the first time in years, I felt Thomas return my son, no longer manipulated by Vanessa. Lily, my granddaughter, was the fresh breeze blowing through the house. The 17-year-old, with her black hair tied high and a radiant smile, decided to move in with me to prepare for her first year of college. "Gran, this house is so much more fun than Mom's," Lily said, dropping her backpack in the living room. She brought laughter music from her Bluetooth speaker and stories about school breathing life back into the house. One afternoon, I saw Lily sitting in the garden reading under the oak tree, and I thought Edward would be so proud of her. The house is no longer empty. Each morning, I wake up, brew tea, and step into the garden where I've started planting a new flower bed white chrysanthemums and lilies, like the bouquets at the wake, but now they symbolize rebirth. I kneel on the earth, my hands touching the damp soil Edward once tended, feeling his presence in every branch, every petal. "Do you see, Edward?" I whisper. "We're still here." To honor him, I signed up for a painting class at the community center. Holding a brush for the first time in years, my hands trembled. But as colors bloomed on the canvas, a painting of our oak tree, I felt alive again. I also started writing a memoir, capturing memories with Edward mornings, brewing coffee nights, listening to the rain, and the journey of rediscovering myself after he was gone. Each word I write is a promise to him that I'll keep living, not just surviving. Thomas visits, often bringing homemade bread and stories about work. Once he looked at the flower bed in the garden and said, "Dad would love this, Mom." I smiled, knowing he's trying to make amends, and I'm ready to forgive. Lily, with her youthful energy, helps me clean Edward's bookshelf, finding old notebooks filled with math problems and notes. "Grandpa was amazing, wasn't he?" she says, and I nod my eyes, glistening but my heart full of warmth. Each evening as the sunset bathes the garden in gold, Lily and I sit on the porch, where Edward and I used to stargaze in our happiest days. The porch, with its wooden railing Edward painted himself, has become my place of peace. One night, Lily brought out 2 mugs of peppermint tea, setting them on the small table, and laughed as she told me about an eccentric teacher at school. "Gran, he's like Grandpa, always going off on tangents," she said, her black hair shimmering under the porch light. I smiled, my heart warm, feeling as if this house has never lost its laughter. Sitting there, gazing at the chrysanthemums and lilies I planted to honor Edward, I reflect on my journey. I've walked through the darkness of grief, betrayal, and fear to find myself again. Vanessa once called me a useless old woman, but I'm no longer the trembling Clara in the funeral home's small room. I'm Clara, 72, a retired teacher, a mother, a wife, and above all, a woman who's learned to stand strong through the storm. Edward didn't just leave me the house, he left me the courage to live true to myself. Lily looked at me, her eyes sparkling as if she knew what I was thinking. "Gran, I'm so proud of you," she said, squeezing my hand. "Mom tried to take the house, but you didn't let her win. You're stronger than anyone I know." I held her hand tightly, tears glistening, but my heart overflowing with joy. Lily, with her pure heart and fierce resolve, is the gift Edward and I gave to the world through Thomas. I know Vanessa might come back. She might find new ways to stir trouble, but I'm not afraid. The house at 24 Maple Street with the oak tree bearing our names, with the flower bed blooming under the sun, is my fortress. More than that, I have Thomas, who's finding his way again after leaving Vanessa. I have Lily, the youthful breeze breathing life into my days. And I have Edward not in body, but in every memory, every line he wrote, every flower I plant. That night, after Lily went to bed, I sat in Edward's armchair holding his old notebook. Moonlight slipped through the window, illuminating pages filled with math problems and notes, a reminder that he's always here. I turned to the last page where he wrote, "For Clara, always my answer." I smiled, pressing the notebook to my chest, feeling my heartbeat blend with the pulse of the house. This journey wasn't just about keeping the house. It was about finding myself Clara, the woman who loved lost and rose stronger. At 72, I'm learning to paint, writing my memoir, and planting flowers not to prove anything to Vanessa, but to live fully for myself. Edward gave me the house, but more importantly, he gave me myself, a Clara, unafraid of the future, no matter what it brings. I stood and stepped onto the porch, watching the sunset fade behind the oak tree. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lilies like an embrace from Edward. I whispered, "Thank you for everything." The house stood firm, as steadfast as our love, and I knew I'd keep living, laughing, and loving, not just for Edward, but for myself. As this story ends, I want to say to you, the one listening, that it's never too late to find your strength. No matter your age, no matter what you've lost, you can rise again, as I did. Please comment below. Let me know what you've learned from this story and the city you're in. I, Clara, will always be here in this house, waiting for your story.